gusta lee más, hoy nos acompaña Lisa Mosconi, quien es un referente en el mundo de la neurociencia y alguien que está transformando nuestra manera de entender la salud de las mujeres, un cerebro a la vez. Lisa tiene un doctorado en neurociencia y medicina nuclear y es directora de la iniciativa del cerebro femenino de Weill Cornell Medicine en la ciudad de Nueva York. Y también es autora de varios libros, entre ellos El cerebro XX y el más reciente y del que vamos a hablar hoy, Menopausia y cerebro, publicado por Editorial Kairos. Lisa, welcome and thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really happy to talk to you about the book and my work in general. And thank you all so much for the very warm reception. I really appreciate it.
I'm so impressed with your book and so impressed with the investigation behind it. So let's start from the beginning. You have this amazing background in neuroscience and nuclear medicine, but in what moment did you realize, like this is it, I want to dedicate my life work to women's health?
I would say from a fairly young age. So my parents are nuclear physicists, both of them. So really grew up into a scientific environment. And I always wanted to learn about the brain, about psychology, about psychiatry. And then I realized what I actually wanted to do was neurology and neuroscience. I love chemistry. I love biology. I always have. So when I was in college, my grandmother, I'm Italian. I was born and raised in Florence, in Italy. And the way I grew up, as many of my friends, is that my grandparents really raised me. And I was very, very close with my grandmother, with my mother's mother, who developed mild cognitive impairment at first, and then she progressed to a diagnosis of dementia. And that was heartbreaking and shocking for so many reasons, including that she was such an intelligent woman. She was one of the very first women in Italy to go to university and graduate from university. And that was really, really extremely heartbreaking to see her struggling with her memory, with her attention, and then becoming less and less self-sufficient and whatnot. So that was also really scary for me and my mother because within a few years, both of my grandmother's sisters also developed Alzheimer's disease, and all three sisters passed away from it, whereas their brother was spared. So at that point, by then, I was doing my PhD in neuroscience, in neurology, and I started asking this question, is it just me? Is it just my family? Or is there a bigger lesson that needs to be learned? And that's how I learned that it was not just my family. And this is actually quite common because Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common form of dementia on the planet, affects more women than men. So
Mm.
much so that today almost two-thirds of all Alzheimer's patients are women, and the lifetime risk of developing Alzheimer's is twice as high for women than men, starting at age 45. So it's a really strong concern, I believe, that's being quite overlooked in science and medicine. And that's how I started. And now I started from by being really, really focused on Alzheimer's disease especially for women, Alzheimer's prevention for women. And now I'm more branching out into women's brains as the focus, not just for Alzheimer's, but for other things that can impact women's brain health.
One of the things that impacted me the most from your book is at the very beginning when you show the PET scan in the book, and it's showing that 30% drop in brain energy after menopause. And I believe you say it's like the first PET scan that someone did in women's brain, right? When you did it. So thank you so much for doing that work. And what does actually mean in daily life? Like, what can we
Mm.
see affecting our, yeah, daily motions and whatever after this happens in our brain?
Yes. So we have done quite a few studies trying to map the menopause transition and its effects on women's brains starting in midlife. And what was unique about our work when we started, which honestly, it's over a decade ago, is that as a brain scientist, I approached that question the way I always approach any question, which is what's been done already, right? I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to know what's already been done. And what was really shocking to me as a woman is that the answer was nothing. There wasn't a single brain imaging study looking at women's brains before and after menopause, and not even at different transition stages. So we started the simplest possible way, which is like we have a group of women with a regular menstrual cycle, they're premenopausal, another group of women with an irregular menstrual cycle, perimenopausal, and then a group of women who are postmenopausal. Are there any differences? And the very first study is the one you mentioned, which we published in 2017, where we see that brain energy levels are quite distinct at different menopausal stages, and they're significantly lower after the menopausal transition at the postmenopausal stage. We've also shown that the structure of the brain is different. We have shown that there is loss of gray matter volume
Yeah.
after menopause. We have shown that there are changes in connectivity. We've shown that there are changes in blood flow to the brain, which we've shown a number of differences at that point and now changes over time, so I think the most important outcome of our work is that we're finally validating what women have been saying for centuries, if not longer, which is that menopause does change your brain, right? There is a legitimate number of transformations that do take place in women's brains as we go through menopause, especially at the molecular level, which have been quite well documented. And we have shown changes and alterations in women's brains using brain imaging. And I think that's really important because now women have a means to push back and say, this is not just in my head, right? I'm not making it up. There's a legitimate change that needs to be better explored. What that also means is that many women going through menopause, over 80% of women experience at least one neurological symptom during the transition to menopause, right? So the most common neurological symptoms, brain symptoms, are hot flashes,
Yeah.
night sweats, right? Everybody knows that. Not many women know that those changes come from their brains, right? We have so many patients coming to us and saying, there's something wrong with my skin. And we're like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
That's actually your brain that's glitching at regulating body temperature, right? But then the second most common symptom is brain fog. And is actually the most concerning symptom for so many women that you just can't think straight, right? There's the forgetfulness, the memory lapses, the having a hard time paying attention. Clinically, we refer to that as mental fatigue or
Yeah.
cognitive fatigue, when you just feel like your brain is shot, like you just can't feel mentally energized. And that can be extremely scary to the point that so many women are so worried that they might be developing early onset dementia, right? So that's another neurological symptom that correlates quite well with the brain energy changes that we find in the brain. And that makes perfect sense, right? We say cognitive fatigue, mental fatigue, and sure enough, your brain energy levels are meaningfully lower
Yeah.
for postmenopausal women. So I think that's important to know. There are other symptoms like mood changes, sleep changes that are quite impactful, like anxiety, depressive symptoms. For some women, irritability or just rage. You just don't feel like yourself. And if you also can't sleep, right, that's even more of a reason to feel impacted by
Yeah.
all the changes. I also want to be clear, there's no need to pathologize this, right? These are changes that many women have experienced to some extent in the past with puberty or pregnancy or postpartum. It's not that menopause is a disease. There's nothing pathological about this. However, the symptoms are real and they do deserve attention and care.
I completely agree with the fact that they need attention and care. I've been so impacted by your book and how as a women, we don't get like the same treatment medically as men or the same like investigation level. And
Yeah.
there's this you talk about bikini medicine, like this
Yeah.
idea that women's health stops at their reproductive organs. And how do you think that that affects the way menopause is treated today or women's health in general?
I think it's a big issue. It's a really big unspoken issue. So historically, the idea has been that medically, what makes a woman is those body parts that fit
Yeah.
under a bikini, and that's about it. So basically, the assumption would be that a woman's brain was the same as a man's brain. And since men are easier to work with for whatever reason, then let's just study men. And whatever we find, we'll just assume that that applies to women as well. And it turns out that that is incorrect. I mean, any person could have told you, right? But from a biological perspective, women's brains are not the same as men's brains. And what we have shown, and others have shown as well, is that women's brains age differently from men's brains. And these differences become quite clinically meaningful in midlife as women go through menopause, because at that point, at least basic research has shown that there can be accelerated brain aging for women and not men. So that's something to take into account. The fact that women's brains have not been studied is clearly an issue. The fact that the majority of neuroscience or brain research is based on men or has been based on men historically is a big deal because men don't go through menopause.
Yeah.
Right? Men don't go through pregnancy. Men don't bear children. So whatever happens in our bodies and brains as a result of those transitions has been understudied on account of men not going through those changes. So I think now there's a big movement to reclaim menopause and other reproductive history events for women. And there's a big push for science to really come through and help out in that respect.
Well, you took a really big first step in that field, so thank you so much. And another thing I loved about your book is that you're very intentional about including different identities and experiences, like from trans individuals to racial disparities. So why was that important to you to include?
Because I am a scientist, and whatever research I do needs to be meaningful to all people. It's really important to me that, especially in this book, all aspects of hormonal impact on the brain would be touched on.
Yeah.
My experience is with the research I do, but obviously I'm a scientist, so I have access to other people's work, which I think is so important to be inclusive, even that way, right? It's not just about me, it's about us as a scientific community coming together to really understand the impact of hormonal transformations, hormonal changes, hormonal therapies on brain health. So yes, for me, it's really, really important. I think women are almost like the forgotten gender, if you
Mhm.
will, right? We have been left out of conversations. We have been, in some ways, left out of cultural advancements, especially when it comes to women's health. And it doesn't take a scientist to notice how, women's financial, legal, and even physical security remains in jeopardy. But it does take a clinical scientist and physicians to really denounce the fact that women's health is also in jeopardy, and the health of all individuals who go through hormonal changes is still in jeopardy because we have not done the work. Not because we don't want to, right? It's a combination of thinking that is important and being funded to do the work. So both things need to come together. And it was very important to me to be accessible to
Yeah.
everyone and helpful to whoever may benefit from this.
Yeah, I think that's like the most important part because not only have we been like the forgotten gender, but there's no such a lot of information we can recur to.
No.
And I mean, as another identities like trans or racial disparities, it's even harder for them to access this kind of information. So I say thank you with all my heart for putting this out there. And just like as a white woman, I know that there's steps that I can do to like help other people or like see the things that are being wrong in the medicine field. So
Yeah.
it's such an important book. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I always say that this book is really like my love letter to
Yeah.
womanhood and to all women. And I really hope that if there's one lesson that we can all learn collectively is to be kind to each other and to others and to
Yeah.
be supportive because we are at this turning point where research is just catching up, right? Clinical practice will follow eventually. But in the meantime, we all need a community. We need a support group. We need to be able to just exchange notes, right?
Yeah.
What's your experience? What did you do? Do you have any tips? How do I feel better? Let's work on this together. I think it's so heartwarming when women help each other out and empower each other with their knowledge and their thoughtfulness. And I love,
And we've been like pitted against each other for such a long time, and this has been such like a stigma theme
yeah,
or like such a taboo around it that I find it so like heartwarming that you put this out there and it starts a conversation, right? Like it takes away the taboo to feel it like go to your friends and ask like I've been feeling like this. How are you feeling? Like I've been going through these changes and realize, and that's something you see in the book quite a lot. You're not crazy and you're not alone, and these symptoms have like an explanation.
yeah.
And I feel like women's symptom has been like looked down so much, like even with menstruation pain or endometriosis and stuff like that, that people like look down and it's like, oh, you're just being like, you're exaggerating, you're fine. So I think this book's open it door to a much larger world that needs to be explored.
Thank you so much. That's so generous of you, and I appreciate it so much. And I think that was really my intention with the book, to talk about things that are difficult to talk about. And I think if we borrow from science and we learn the why of things and the how of things, then the conversation will flow more spontaneously. I have noticed that I've shared specific notions, like I'll give you an example that menopause is not a disease, but it's not just aging
Yeah.
either, right? So let's just cut through the chase. There's no need to be controversial about this. Let's just talk about what it actually is a brain hormone transition, which is not a pathology, but is not just aging, right? There are symptoms that are very real, that are very specific to menopause that need to be addressed, especially if a woman is in distress, right?
Yeah.
And I've noticed that so many people now are using my words. When I say brain health is women's health, now people are saying that commonly. It's become almost a commonplace to know that menopause can impact the brain, right? It's not just the ovaries, it's the brain as well. And more people are just like, it makes so much sense, right?
Yeah.
And now that we have the baseline that comes from a scientist who's doing the research, that legitimizes a lot more conversations.
And lastly, if you could speak directly to every woman entering this phase of life, what would you want them to know about their brains or about themselves?
I would like them to know that they're right? You're not crazy. You're not making things up. We know that. This is why this happens. Your brain is going through a transformation that has a reason to happen, right? It's a biologically programmed event. It's no picnic, right? Some women
Yeah.
just breeze through it. For many women, it's an actual legitimate challenge. So I would say empower yourself with the knowledge that you need to understand what's happening and all the solutions that are available, right? We tend to think like, oh, there's nothing I can do. No, no, no. There's a lot of things that every woman can do to support herself throughout the transition. And as you do it, you just walk like you own the place.
I
Right?
love that. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so, so much, Lisa. I feel like I've been enlightened with this talk and with your book. And it was such a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, and thank you so much for having me. It was a
Muchas
pleasure to be
gracias,
here.
amigos de la revista. Ya pueden ir a comprar el libro a su Gandhi más cercano y nos vemos pronto.